introduction for Dr. Brooks. Dr. Brooks Robinson is a native Floridian. Dr. Robinson completed his undergraduate study in economics at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and he completed his master's and doctoral degrees in economics at George Mason University in Fairfax, Virginia. Dr. Robinson has been an economist with the U.S. Department of Commerce, but he has published a groundbreaking article entitled Black Unemployment and Infotainment in the Journal of Economic Inquiry. He also published a book entitled Black Economics, a Primer, which serves as a source and fact book on economic terms and concepts. He is a founder and director and chief developer of the Black Economics.org website, and we are very pleased to have him with us. Excuse me just a minute. Okay.
See my screen now?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Randall, for inviting me to be a part of your webinar. My presentation's title is Key Reasons for Black American Unemployment, the Adverse Psychological Effects of Infotainment, and as a kind of side issue, Weak Black American Entrepreneurship. We'll start with this particular slide, which tells a story. But before I start the story, let me thank Dr. Randall for all of her efforts in putting together this series of webinars in connection with recognition of Afro-descendants in the Western Hemisphere, according to the United Nations. It's a great year, and it would be fantastic if there were more observations of the recognition of Afro-descendants in this diaspora. Let's start with this slide, and I want to talk about unemployment and infotainment, and I'll get into the details as we go through this slide. But the important point that I want you to take away from this slide, and the important points that I want you to take away from this presentation, are that, number one, adverse stereotypical images of Black Americans cause hiring officials, simply put, these adverse stereotypical images of Black Americans in media cause hiring officials, not only white hiring officials, but Black hiring officials as well, to make a decision not to hire Blacks. And we'll talk more about that as we go along. So that's the first thing that I want you to take away. When you leave this webinar this evening, you'll understand what adverse stereotypical images are and how they harm us. And then, of course, I want you to know, and you should take away from this presentation, things that you can do to ameliorate the problem and to address the problem. Now, as I said, a side issue that we have as part of all of this is weak Black entrepreneurship, Black American entrepreneurship. Let's think about it this way. We've been in America for over 400 years, and the question is, why is it that we're still standing on a corner? In this case, we see a Black man standing on a corner with a sign that says, "I want to work." We should be able to do better than that, because we should be engaged in entrepreneurship at a high level so that we can create our own jobs. Let's go on to the next slide. Here's our roadmap for today. We're going to talk about adverse effects of unemployment as a startup, as a tie to the issue of health, talk about unemployment rates. We're going to talk about a theoretical and econometric model that, a theoretical framework and an econometric model that explains how we perceive this idea of adverse stereotypical images in infotainment or in media as being a driver for Black unemployment. And then we talk about examples of adverse information, adverse stereotypical images, not only in television, which was the focus of the paper that Dr. Randall mentioned, Black Unemployment and Infotainment, that was published in the Journal of Economic Inquiry in January of 2009. But we also find these negative images of blacks on the internet. I look at specific cases of 60 Minutes, a iconic television program that presents adverse stereotypical images of blacks, as well as some that are not adverse. Black television networks, specifically BET, the formerly existing Black Family Channel, and TV One. We talk about prescriptions for healing, and then we talk just a little bit about Black American entrepreneurship and the weakness thereof. Now, let's talk about the adverse effects of unemployment from a health perspective. And if you read this slide, you'll see that there are at least two costs to unemployment. To the country or to the economy that's involved. You get the loss of output and the related income that is associated with unemployment. So when blacks or whites are unemployed, you lose their output and you lose the income that they would produce by working. But then there are the personal and psychological costs that are associated with unemployment, which include deterioration of job skills, reduced self-esteem, and stress. And then I'm going to read this paragraph that's at the bottom of this slide because I think it is telling. An increase in the unemployment rate of 1 percentage point maintained for 6 years is associated with 20,000 additional cardiovascular deaths, 920 suicides, 650 homicides, 4,000 state mental hospital admissions, 3,030 state prison admissions. And where did I find this material? In a book called Macroeconomics, that was written by Professor Abel, and Professor Bernanke. Now, the name Bernanke might sound like a familiar name to it because it is a book that was written by our current chairman of the Federal Reserve Board, Ben Bernanke. And, of course, this book was written way back in 1992 or published in 1992, so he's had a long knowledge of this fact, yet, you know, the government and the United States Federal Reserve Board still finds it very difficult under these current conditions to get the unemployment rate down for whites as well as for blacks. And what is the difference between the black and white unemployment rates? Well, the bottom line of this chart shows the white unemployment rate, the top line shows the black unemployment rate, and you'll see that in almost all, for the entire period shown here, the black unemployment rate is almost twice, or at least twice, that of whites. And so it's a problem. It's really a problem for black Americans. Now we talk about infotainment and stereotypes because we say in our article that this is what is driving the outcome. And so here's some definitions of infotainment. We're talking about media forms, and we're talking about those media forms reflecting information and entertainment. That's what comprises this concept of infotainment. And then, of course, stereotypes are conveyed through these media through roles that portray antisocial, mundane, or extraordinary behaviors. And let's define that just a little more clearly and precisely. Antisocial behavior, I'm not going to read all of these. You can read them as you go through, or you can read them later once you get the slides. But the fact of the matter is, when we watch media, observe media on an ongoing basis, we see all of these roles being portrayed or played by black Americans. They are antisocial roles in many cases, mundane roles, and then extraordinary roles when we're projected as being super in our athletic abilities or in our artistic and entertainment abilities. It is not a one-way situation, that is, whites observing these images and then projecting negative behavior toward blacks because of those images, but African Americans themselves project those images or project that behavior after watching these images against each other. And one of the reasons we do that is because we watch so much media, or are involved in participating in consuming so much media. According to this slide, Nielsen says that we watch 40% more TV than any other group in the country. Now, I wasn't able to find those statistics in another source, looking at the American Time Use Survey, But looking at the American Time Use Survey, you will find that blacks spend at least 33% more time watching television. Of course, Nielsen might be overstating the case just slightly, but still, the fact of the matter is that blacks spend a lot of time watching television and participating in consuming other forms of media. Here's the theoretical model that explains how the system works. And so you get the consumption of television or media or infotainment in step 1. It's observed by whites, step 2A, and blacks, step 2B. In step 2C, blacks exhibit stereotypical behavior because of watching these images. We pick up those images from media and then we reflect them in our behavior. And then in steps 3A and 3B, both whites and blacks begin to form devalued perceptions of black Americans as a result of consuming those forms of infotainment with the adverse stereotypical images. And then ultimately, with those images in our mind, we begin to exhibit negative behavior toward blacks as a result of those images. I think this is a succinct way of conveying how this whole process works. If you read the article that Dr. Randall mentioned and that I've mentioned, you'll find some econometric frameworks as well, in addition to the theoretical framework, that try to show how we go about statistically proving that adverse stereotypical images of black Americans cause increases in the black unemployment rate and in the black-white unemployment rate gap. I won't get into great detail here. I invite you to read the paper, and if you have questions about the paper, or if you want a copy of the paper, just send me an email. You'll find out my email at the end of this presentation, and I'll send you a copy of the paper, and you can read it for yourself. But we use standard variables. GDP is a variable here. We use the number of television programs as an important variable that reflects the amount of infotainment that is consumed. But we also use as explanatory variables the experience that blacks have working, the average years of schooling or the training that we have. We've used some social phenomena variables, the SP variables, to also factor into our model. And we use an interactive term, the television program variable and GDP, to help explain how all of these variables contribute to the black unemployment rate and to the black-white unemployment rate gap. Again, I don't have time to get into a full explanation of it here. As I said, I invite you to read the paper and or to write to me, and I'll send you the paper, and you can read it and begin to decipher for yourself how all of this works. But the theoretical model that we've shown already and this econometric framework helps convey how the model works and how it explains the black unemployment rate. The second equation that's on the slide is just a system of simultaneous equations that also explain this black unemployment rate and the black-white unemployment rate gap. Moving along, I think it's important to realize that once we start to consume television and other forms of media, we may be turned off from those media as we see those images really presenting us in very negative fashion, very negative light. And so what do? Well, in my case, I basically turned off television, and I watch very little television today. But the problem is, no matter where you go, you're going to find adverse images of black Americans. And I'm letting this slide remain on the screen for some time here as it sinks into you in terms of what I'm about to explain. Each one of these photographs that you see on this slide, I found on MSN website. That's my home page. For some reason, I've adopted that as my home page. And over the course of time, I would say in the last year or so, I have just observed periodically photographs that convey black Americans in very negative light. The two center photographs are self-explanatory. You know, is your new job lousy? The center photograph in the middle. Why would a black person find their new job to be lousy? Why not a white? In the bottom photo in the middle, it says 10 bad work habits. Why is it that blacks have bad work habits? Why not a white having a bad work habit? The top left-hand photograph is titled, if you were to see the caption when it was presented on MSN, was highly known or highly publicized firings. And of course, we know about the firings of the parties presented in the photographs, recent firings for that matter. The top right photograph depicting a black American male sleeping during an office meeting. That's highly unlikely. Why wouldn't we show a black in that particular situation? The bottom left photograph with a black woman holding a cell phone was, the caption for that picture was, "What are the best excuses for being late?" Now, why is it that black women have to be late for work? And why do they need to use their telephones to convey that message to their supervisors? And finally, another very adverse image, as far as I'm concerned, is a picture in the bottom right-hand corner. And the caption for that picture was, "Will bad spelling ruin your efforts to win a job during a job interview?" Well, why must we show black Americans associated with bad spelling looking for jobs? Well, this is the nature of the media, and in this case, MSN and the Internet. So no matter where we go today, whether it be television, whether it be the Internet, we find adverse stereotypical images of blacks or negative images of blacks that don't convey well to hiring officials who have to make the decision to hire us. A couple of more examples. I taped and assessed 13 60-minute programs in 2003 and looked at not only the program segments, but the commercials and the promotional materials. And these are some statistics. These are some statistics that convey the results. Won't get into a lot of details here, but of the 51 program segments, 6 featured black Americans, and 2 of those 6 had positive images. I think you find more generally, if you look at these data closely, that as far as commercials are concerned, commercials tend to portray black Americans in a more positive light because the advertisers are trying to sell a product to blacks. And promotional materials can be kind of mixed. They can show negative images as well as positive images of black Americans. But 60 Minutes does not have a stellar record, at least in 2003, in terms of its presentation of black Americans. I went in 2006 to the month of December, and the first week, or actually the second week in the month of December of 2006, and looked at programs that were featured by BET, the Black Family Channel, which existed at that time in TV1. And here are the results of the adverse stereotypical images, the stereotypical images that were presented by these networks. And what we find is that the Black Family Channel had the best record, having the least amount of stereotypical images and the most astereotypical images, that is the positive images. This table shows in the top panel the programs and the percentage of programs that fell into the various categories: stereotypical images, clearly stereotypical images, those that were probably stereotypical, and then the astereotypical or positive images. The bottom panel provides statistics on the percent of time, airtime, or broadcast time that these images were presented. Now, once we find that these adverse stereotypical images are causing in our minds the formation of adverse images and perceptions of blacks, and then for hiring officials to then make decisions to exclude blacks from being hired, then what do we do? And here are some prescriptions for healing. One of the things we can do is to reduce our consumption of these images in infotainment, in the media, so that we don't find ourselves conveying or portraying these images ourselves. And then we need to attempt to limit media presentations that that show adverse stereotypical images of blacks. And what we can do is consume media that we have control over. Look at or participate and consume media that involves our reading or media that involves learning. But entertainment, I think we need to begin to be very careful about the media that we consume. We can do more. We can go further, and we can transmit comments to networks and to newspapers and to websites about the adverse images that we see there, and we can support media that show black Americans in very favorable lights. It is really important that we take these steps if we intend to try to begin to change the images that are projected of black Americans and to then have an effect on the black unemployment rate. Now, shifting gears just a little bit, the first slide that we showed as part of this presentation focused on a black man standing on the corner somewhere saying that he wanted to work. Well, it is clear that people who make decisions about who works for them typically like to employ individuals that look like them and who act like them, who think like them. And so we have to take it upon ourselves to create jobs for ourselves. There's always a situation where there's just a need for employees, and employers will hire some black Americans, but at the margin, they will make decisions in many cases not to hire black Americans. And they will do that if they see these adverse stereotypical images. One of the things I wanted to show you with this slide is that there are a relatively small number of black businesses, and most importantly, the number of black businesses that can hire employees is also very small. For example, in 2007, this slide shows there were 1.9 million black businesses. Only 100,000, or about 5.5%, were large enough to have employees. Not only that, when you look at the receipts are relatively small compared to white firms. And when you look at the receipts per employee, the receipts are quite small. Black non-employing firms had receipts in 2007 of about $21,000, $21.4 thousand. And even employers, those who had employees, only had receipts of $98.9 thousand. So we see that black firms are small, and so they can't contribute significantly to reducing the black unemployment rate. So what we need to do, in part, in addition to taking action against adverse stereotypical images, which hamper black employment, we also need to become more entrepreneurial, and we need to create businesses that are just not sole proprietors, but that are businesses that can, in fact, be large enough to hire black employees. I'll stop there, Dr. Randall, and just put up a slide with contact information so that those who are participating in the webinar, if they have questions or comments about my presentation that are not discussed in this webinar, they can contact me via this information. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak during this webinar.
Thank you, Dr. Robinson. That's fascinating, and in fact tied in with our last webinar where we talked about the role of media in increasing the payday lending problem. What I want to do now is take a minute to change over to our question and answer period. We'll be with you in just a second. Okay, thank you. What we'd like to do is have a 10-minute question and answer, question and comment on Dr. Robinson's presentation. Please unmute your phone, raise your hand. If you look at the little tab on your control panel, there's a hand. If you click on it, that will indicate that you want to make a comment or ask a question. You can write in something, but we give priority people who want to orally participate. And at this time, I will turn the question and discussion period over to Issa Randall.
Hi, so we have a question from Kenneth Catchum. Kenneth, are you there?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, my question, let's go back to BET TV1. Those are owned now by a white majority. HBO bought out BET. I remember when they were initially bought 5% of their shares back in the 80s, and now I'm positive that their ownership percentage is much greater. Those media conglomerates come from the highest up. Fox News Corporation bought out DirecTV. That's Rupert Murdoch. So it is in their agenda, it is in their initiative to, create, number one, to satisfy the desires of consumers that consume the type of information, the type of programming, the type of behavioral conditioning, and the images that are projected on these screens, okay? I'm just going to cross over and give you the question of how is it that we, and I have a lot of friends in Hollywood, African American, who are not getting roles, producing, acting, directing. I mean, how is it that we can't change the emphasis that we have on utilizing current media and start having more internet media and influencing people to, because the internet is the obvious vehicle, and realize that it's all about consumption and capitalism. That these media groups are there to sell a product, to sell an image, and we're going against the grain here by dictating the type of products and images and advertising vehicles that they serve. And let's not forget Oprah too. Oprah puts a book on her show. That book is advertised. It's marketed. It's promoted. Not just I don't see very many African American authors on her show. I rarely watch her show, if at all. I see a lot of white authors on her show, and she is part of it as well. Let's keep it real here now. I mean, what venues do we have, or what options to produce shows that are educational, that are culturally correct, and that promote and project?
I hear what you're saying, and it's a very very relevant question, and I'll be simple in my response to your question. It calls for a change in appetite on the part of Black Americans. Black Americans need to become aware of the adverse effects of these adverse images that are being projected of us in the media, particularly on the networks that you've talked about, and all of the other networks, most of the other networks for that matter, and decide not to consume that media. Once they find audience shares going down, they'll begin to ask questions. Why is audience share, why is viewership going down? And we can tell them, tell the networks, well, we just don't want to consume that kind of media anymore. And then they'll begin to call on those actors and directors who want to produce other forms of media that other types of media that provide more positive images of Black Americans. That's what we need to do, as simple as that. And until we do that, nothing's going to change. As long as we consume it, as long as we allow them to create the appetite and we keep eating, then that's what we're going to get. But once we change the appetite, we can force the ownership to change their perspective and provide a different set of programs and different set of images for Black Americans.
All right, excellent. So next up we have Dominica McBride.
Yes, thank you. I'm in Chicago, Illinois. And thank you for your presentation, Dr. Robinson. I thought it was wonderful and informative. My question relates to the previous person's question and also to your answer. So we have to create a different appetite. It just seems that Black America in general, and I'm generalizing here, has had an appetite for what has been given to us, just like, our body adapts to sugar, and then so we start to crave sugar, and it's very difficult to change that appetite. So I think it's going to be very difficult to change that appetite, and I'm wondering if you could speak on just some practical ways to change that cultural appetite now.
Yeah. It calls for a made-up mind. That's an old saying that they used to use in the black church. You got to have a made-up mind. Well, the bottom line is you got to have a made-up mind. So the first thing is we have to train our young folk somewhere in the school system, somewhere in our homes, starting at home. We have to get a made-up mind that there's a better thing to do than sit in front of the television and waste a lot of time. Kids are the most productive and energetic people in the world. Call a party, have a party, a birthday party, any kind of party. Bring the kids together, have them playing outside. All you'll hear is all of this joyous laughter and game playing and innovation and ingenuity occurring. And then call them in. Let's watch a movie as part of the party. And then you see and hear silence. To me, there's a better way to use time. There's a better way to make benefit of the time that you have. That is to read more and to write more and to think more and to be more creative. So it's up to parents. And there are many parents that are doing this today. They're restricting the amount of television that their children are able to watch. The bottom line, though, is that there is this issue of those Black American parents, mothers who are single-headed household holders, they need someone to help babysit, and they raise their children on television, and so the child gets addicted to television just like you get addicted to cigarettes. And so you have that problem. But it takes a made-up mind. It takes up a made-up mind on the part of an adult. It takes up a made-up mind on the part of that adult to make sure that his or her child does not grow up with an addiction to television, and to learn how to use time wisely. It is a big problem, and it's a problem that we can only solve ourselves. If we don't solve it, nobody else is going to solve it for us, and they will continuously, that is, the ownership of the media will continually use the media to feed us garbage and to feed us adverse stereotypical images of ourselves, because it helps them control and regulate our behavior. So we need to think about it and make up our minds that this is something we're going to do for ourselves. We can't expect others to do it for us.
All right, excellent. And Jacqueline Inja, I'm sorry about the pronunciation, writes in, I think this is referring to the ownership of black businesses. How can you start a business when you have no money?
Well, that's not true. We have lots of money. Do you know how much money black churches raised? This is just one example. Black churches, they won't even tell you how much money they raise. I wrote a paper last fall, which I presented in January, on the black church, and I tried to get information from the three black major denominations, the Church of God in Christ, the National Baptist Convention, and the African Methodist Episcopal Church. All three major church denominations refused to tell me how much money they're collecting, or what their memberships were. You know, we send all of this money and contribute all this money to churches, and then we ask the question, and then they build churches, they build new churches, and make preachers wealthy and make them our leaders. But what are they doing for us in our community? A lot of the resources that we have spent building new churches and mega churches, we could have used those funds to build businesses. As Malcolm said in the 1960s, Malcolm X, I know you're familiar with who he is, he said, hey, we spend money building churches when white folk spend money building businesses. And that's why we see the statistics that we see in the table that I provided earlier today. So we have to make up in our minds that we're going to do something for ourselves. We can't wait for someone else to come along and do it for us. We have to make the decision, and we have to look for resources that are available right within our community to begin to make a change. And if we look around hard enough and long enough and analytically enough, we'll find resources to begin to create businesses and do other things that we need to do for ourselves.
Okay, well, it looks like we're ready for the next speaker. And I want to thank Dr. Robinson again for this wonderful presentation. And I think I do want to give a suggestion about the media, because I actually happen to be a TV junkie and have been TV junkie for a very long time, and understood early on, I raised two sons, and understood early on the impact. And so one of the things I did is taught my very young kids to critique TV as they watch it. And I did it so much that when they got to be teenagers, they would scream at me because we would be talking out loud of critiquing the TV. Mom, it's just TV. I think the other problem is that we look at TV uncritically, and we don't teach our kids to critique the television and media as being unreal and untruthful. And I think that's also something that could be done.
Agreed.
Okay, so